Chosen ones, the sands of time whisper your name across the desert winds. Long before the pyramids cast their shadows, long before for the world's kings carved their empires into stone, a vision was sealed in the heart of Anubis, the keeper of the threshold. He foresaw a being unlike any other, one who would awaken at the very edge of the world's unraveling. And now, as the hourglass shatters, his ancient eyes turn toward you. The gods of old trembled at this sight. They knew that when the final veil was torn, the balance between life and death would rest not in thrones nor in armies, but in the unseen radiance of one chosen soul. This was no ordinary prophecy etched into crumbling walls. It was a secret carried within the chambers of eternity, guarded by the silence of jackals and sealed beneath the black pyramids. The Nile itself bore witness. Its waters carried fragments of visions of a voice that would thunder across centuries. Not the voice of pharaohs, nor the chants of priests, but the call of destiny, summoning a single soul to rise. The ancient scribes described it as a light no darkness could drown, a fire that neither water nor shadow could quench. Even Anubis, lord of the scales, paused his eternal judgment, for he had glimpsed something beyond flesh, beyond the cycle of death. A radiance unbound. Chosen one, you were written into this prophecy. Your name etched not with ink, but with starlight. Every trial, every burden, every silent cry has been a thread woven into this eternal tapestry. And though the world does not see, though nations stumble and kings fall, the unseen hand has already marked you. The jackal-headed guardian weighed countless hearts, yet his vision was fixed on a moment yet to come, the unraveling of all that is known. And in that unraveling, one being stands, a being foreseen, a being awaited, a being anointed. The sands remember you. The tombs whisper you. The heavens prepare for you. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of gold hiding secrets beneath its shifting skin. Far beyond the reach of kings and conquerors lay the tomb that no mortal dared to enter. The silent tomb of Anubis. It was said to be carved not by hands of men, but by shadows themselves, its walls breathing with the weight of forgotten oaths. Travelers who stumbled too near spoke of a silence so deep it pressed upon the bones, a silence that seemed to watch, to judge, to wait. Within, torches that had never been lit still glimmered faintly, as though the darkness itself held memory of fire. Hieroglyphs lined the stone corridors, telling of a vision locked away before the age of empires. They spoke not of kings nor dynasties, but of the one who would awaken when the world stood on the edge of collapse. Anubis, guardian of the passage between life and death, had commanded this record to be sealed, his priests sworn to bind it in eternal shadow. Every step inside the tomb echoed like a heartbeat against eternity. Dust fell like slow rain, carrying with it the breath of ancient incantations. It was here that the scales of judgment were hidden, not the earthly replicas crafted for temples, but the true measure, cold and divine, where hearts heavier than truth were condemned. The air was thick with incense, long faded, and yet the scent lingered, as though time itself refused to disturb the sanctity of the chamber. Legends whispered that Anubis walked still within these halls, not as a memory, but as a presence felt in the shiver of the air, in the trembling of flame, in the weight that pressed against the soul of any who dared to cross the threshold. The tomb was silent, yes, But it was not empty. It breathed with a waiting, with a gaze unseen, with the soundless question of a prophecy still unfulfilled. Beneath the black sarcophagus rested the secret sealed with eternity's hand. It was not gold, nor jewels, nor the bones of kings, but a vision, a fragment of the end, a glimpse of the being Anubis foresaw, a whisper that would echo beyond time, trembling across the fabric of the living and the dead. And as the sands shifted above, as stars traced their endless circles, the silence deepened, for the tomb still waited. Beneath the shifting dunes, where the desert hides its most guarded secrets, there was a chamber that trembled with the weight of eternity. Few had ever entered, and fewer still returned with their minds intact. It was said that within lay a scroll older than empires, older even than the crowns of pharaohs, wrapped in linen and sealed with the blood of priests who vowed it would never be read until the appointed hour. The air around it pulsed with unseen power, as though the parchment itself was alive, breathing in silence, waiting for the one for whom it was written. The scroll was no ordinary record of kings or battles. Its words were etched with a fire that did not burn, characters carved in a script that shifted under the eye, refusing to be held in place by mortal understanding. To gaze upon it was to hear echoes of voices that spoke before the world was formed, voices that carried both judgment and mercy, both death and life. Some called it the voice of the desert, others the word of the foreseen. But in the shadows of the chamber, whispers dared to call it by another name, a testimony pointing toward a greater light yet to come. The priests who guarded it had long perished, their bones now dust upon the stone floor, yet their oaths lingered. They had seen visions in their final hours, visions of a man who spoke of truth beyond temples and kingdoms, a man who declared that heaven and earth would pass away, yet his word would endure. The fragments of their visions trembled against the edges of the scroll, hinting of a bridge between the prophecy of Anubis and the living word that walked among men centuries later. Those who dared to touch the scroll felt the weight of their own hearts press against them, as though invisible scales were raised. Many turned away in fear, unable to withstand the reflection of their own soul. But the prophecy was not written for the fearful. It was sealed for the one who would carry the weight of both the living and the dead, the one Anubis foresaw standing at the world's end. The scroll remained unopened, yet its presence burned like fire in the dark. And somewhere in the silence, a voice echoed softly, not in thunder, but in promise, waiting to be heard. The Black Pyramid stood apart from all others, its stone darker than night, absorbing the desert sun as though it fed upon light itself. It was not raised for kings, nor for glory, but for secrecy, a monument to conceal a truth too perilous to reveal. The people of the Nile never spoke its name, for they believed it was cursed, a dwelling place for shadows that even gods would not confront. Its walls were said to hum with a vibration felt through bone, an unearthly rhythm that matched neither heartbeat nor breath. Those who approached swore they heard whispers carried in the wind, whispers not in language, but in sensation, terror, awe, longing. The priests who built it were bound by blood oaths, their eyes hollowed by visions of an end they could not endure. They sealed the pyramid with obsidian stones, declaring that should it ever fall, the final age would begin. But the sands are patient, and stone, no matter how strong, weathers under the breath of eternity. Cracks spread like veins across the blackened surface. Storms swept over it, lightning striking its peak as though the heavens themselves longed to tear it open. The desert tribes who dared wander near said the air grew heavy, their shadows stretching unnaturally long against the walls. They fled, leaving offerings of water and gold at its base, praying the tomb would remain closed. Yet destiny does not bow to fear. One night, under a moon stained red, the earth trembled. A sound rose from the deep, not of collapse, but of release. The pyramid shuddered, stones grinding against one another until a fracture ripped across its peak. From within surged a wind that carried no sand, no dust, only a cry that seemed older than the world itself. The desert roared in answer, dunes rising like waves against the sky. When the shaking ceased, silence claimed the land once more. The black pyramid stood broken, its shadow heavier than before, its secret no longer sealed. Something within had stirred, awakened, remembered. The fracture widened with every dawn, a wound in the earth that could never be mended. From the broken stones of the black pyramid rose a darkness that did not belong to earth alone. It slithered like smoke, yet bore weight heavier than iron, reaching beyond the desert into the hearts of kings. Nations began to tremble without reason, rulers waking in the night drenched in fear, their dreams gnawed by visions of a serpent coiled upon their thrones. It did not strike, not yet. Instead, it watched, patient, its shadow stretching silently across borders and seas. The prophets of forgotten lands spoke of it in trembling tones. They described a power that would rise, not with armies first, but with whispers. It would enter the ears of rulers, bend their wills, ignite their hungers. Thrones would crumble not by sword, but by corruption, and the serpent's laughter would echo in every betrayal, every blood-soaked bargain made in silence. Merchants saw it in the markets, where gold outweighed truth. Priests saw it in their temples, where idols stood taller than faith. And the people, broken and weary, felt it in their bones, though they could not name it. Ancient texts described this shadow as older than kingdoms, as if it had slithered through history since the first fall of man. Yet hidden among these records was a quiet testimony, one that spoke of a different figure. A man who once declared, "Behold, I give you authority to trample on serpents and scorpions." His words lingered like embers in the dark, whispered among the faithful, as a shield against the venom creeping into nations. The serpent shadow recoiled whenever that name was spoken, though few dared to speak it aloud. But the shadow was cunning. It disguised itself as light, wearing crowns, cloaking itself in banners of peace, while stirring the hunger for war. It twisted truth into lies, weaving illusions so tightly that even the wise stumbled. Kingdom rose against kingdom. Alliances turned to ash, and blood watered the soil of nations who never saw the blade coming. The serpent moved unseen, yet everywhere its shadow fell, chaos blossomed like a poisoned flower. And still, deep in the silence, a promise waited. For as wide as the shadow spread, a greater light stirred, unseen, preparing to break forth. In the halls where no sunbeam dared to linger stood the great scales of Anubis, crafted not by mortal hands but by the laws of eternity itself. They gleamed faintly in the dark, untouched by dust, as though time itself bowed before their authority. Countless hearts had been weighed upon them, the silent measure of truth and deceit, of purity and corruption. No bribe could tilt their balance, no plea could soften their verdict. The scales moved only to reveal the essence of a soul, stripped of pretense, laid bare before the judgment of forever. It was said that when the heart was placed upon one side, a feather of Maat was set upon the other. The smallest tremor revealed more than lifetimes of words could conceal. Some hearts rose light as breath, released into the peace beyond. Others sank heavy as stone, devoured by the jaws of the waiting beast, condemned to wander in unending night. The chamber carried echoes of their final cries, echoes that clung to the stone like shadows that never faded. But this judgment was not for the dead alone. Whispers told of a time when the scales would weigh not only departed souls, but the hearts of the living, rulers, nations, and even the earth itself. What is a kingdom, if not a heart? What is a nation, if not a soul, bound by oath and blood? The prophecy carved upon hidden walls declared that the day would come, when the scales would be raised above the world, and nothing, not even mountains or seas, could escape their measure. Those who had visions of this moment spoke of a trembling sky, stars falling like sparks from a broken flame. They saw deserts stretch into oceans, and oceans crack into dust. And through it all, the scales remained steady, unmoved, waiting for the one who was foreseen to stand before them. The destiny of many would rest upon the weight of one, the balance of eternity tipped not by armies or crowns, but by the heart that bore the prophecy within. Beneath the Nile, deeper than any diver could descend, there ran another river, a river unseen by mortal eyes, flowing with neither water nor silt, but with the essence of countless souls. The ancients called it the vein of eternity, the passage where the dead drifted in silence toward judgment. Its current was heavy with voices, whispers of kings and beggars alike, all stripped of crown and coin, carried in the same tide of remembrance. It was in this hidden current that something began to stir. The river, once steady and unbroken, quivered with unrest. The souls that drifted within its depths trembled, as though the weight of eternity had shifted. Some cried out in fear, others in awe, for they felt the pulse of a presence awakening beneath them. A shadow at first, then a form, rising slowly as if torn from the fabric of sleep. The river of souls itself seemed to recoil, its current bending around the figure that emerged, resisting, yet unable to contain. Legends foretold that when the river stirred, the gates of the underworld would loosen. Yet within the turmoil came a sound unlike the cries of the lost. It was the echo of words once spoken above the earth. Out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. The souls clung to this memory, though few understood it. For in the stirring, the shadow seemed not only to awaken, but to hunger, seeking the one who bore the authority to command the waters of death themselves. The priests of Anubis had feared this moment, for they knew that once the river shifted, the balance of the living would feel its tremor. Dreams grew darker, nations restless, rulers uneasy. The unseen current that tied worlds together was no longer at peace. And beneath its endless flow, the awakening figure opened unseen eyes, eyes that pierced through the veil, searching for the one who was written. The Nile swelled upon the surface, its banks flooding fields, its waters rising higher than in memory. Farmers called it a curse, scholars a sign, but none saw the truth, that the river of souls had begun to stir against its bounds. The midday sun once blazed over the Nile like a crown of fire, the ancient symbol of Ra's dominion. To the people, its light was life itself, chasing away the darkness that stalked at dawn and dusk. Temples rose in its honor, golden obelisks piercing the heavens to mirror its brilliance. Yet even the greatest of gods cast shadows, and in the days foretold, the light of Ra began to falter. It came not as a sudden strike, but as a creeping veil, a shadow swallowing the edges of the sun until its circle grew pale. The priests trembled as they lifted their hands in prayer, but their chants found no answer. The sky dimmed as though the heavens themselves had turned their face away, and the air grew heavy with dread. Birds fell silent, animals pressed close to the earth, and the people looked upward in terror as the sun, once invincible, was consumed by shadow. The eclipse was more than a celestial sign. It was a judgment carved into the firmament. Ancient texts spoke of this moment as the unmasking of false light, the hour when the god of day would bow before eternity's decree. In the fading glow, the obelisks cast long, distorted shadows, as if mocking the very faith they had once embodied. Temples quaked, and golden idols split as though fire had burned them from within. But deeper still was the fear that spread among rulers. If the sun itself could be dimmed, what power could they trust? Their crowns glittered with borrowed brilliance, yet in the eclipse their jewels dulled, revealing the frailty of their thrones. People wept in the streets, not for hunger nor for war, but for the death of certainty. For the first time, the god who never slept had closed his eyes. The eclipse stretched longer than any could remember. It seemed as though the world itself held its breath, caught between light and shadow, waiting for a verdict that had not yet been spoken. Some swore they saw forms moving across the blackened sun, serpentine, winged, unearthly, shapes that whispered of powers rising through the veil. In the forgotten chambers beneath the shifting sands, the jackal priesthood once gathered in silence. They were not many, but their oaths bound them stronger than iron, their eyes marked by the shadow of Anubis. Cloaked in black, faces veiled, they walked between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, their voices seldom raised above a whisper. It was said that to hear their chant was to feel your soul loosen from your body, drawn toward judgment before its time. They guarded prophecies too dangerous for kings, too heavy for nations. Scrolls wrapped in bone, sealed with wax made from funeral fires, lay in their chambers, each carrying fragments of visions. Among them was one vision feared above all, the rise of the foreseen one at the breaking of the age. For this prophecy they gave their sight, their freedom, their blood. Yet even in their devotion, shadows of doubt crept through. What power could bring balance to both the living and the dead? What presence could silence the serpent that even nations could not withstand? Some among them whispered of a figure beyond the desert gods, a man of no crown, no temple, who once declared, "I am the resurrection and the life." The name was spoken only in fragments, for they feared it would burn their tongues. Yet in the stillness of their chambers, they admitted that even the scales of Anubis seemed to tremble before such words. The whispers spread like smoke, not written, not proclaimed, but breathed in secrecy. Still, their rituals continued. They traced circles of ash around their altars, lit lamps that burned without oil, and chanted to hold back the tide of awakening. But the walls shook. The scrolls themselves grew restless, their seals cracking without human hand. The priesthood knew their time was slipping, that their guardianship was nearing its end. The whispers grew louder, not only among them, but in the dreams of strangers, in the cries of children, in the silence of the night. At the heart of the desert, where storms never ceased, there rose a throne unlike any other. It was not carved from gold, nor adorned with jewels, but formed from blackened stone and the ash of countless sacrifices. Flames licked its edges without consuming it, a fire that seemed to burn from within the earth itself. Those who drew near found their breath stolen, their knees trembling, as though invisible chains dragged them toward submission. The ancients called it the throne of dust and fire, a seat forged for the one who would claim dominion when the veil between worlds tore apart. Legends whispered that no king had ever sat upon it without destruction following. Those who dared place themselves upon its seat were consumed from within. Their flesh turned to dust, even as fire poured from their eyes. It was not a throne of rule, but of trial, demanding a soul unbroken by the weight of eternity. To sit upon it was to hold judgment and be judged, to burn and yet remain unconsumed. Still, the throne waited. Its flames never dimmed, its dust never scattered. For it was not built for the kings of men, nor for the priests of the gods, but for the foreseen one, whose arrival was sealed in the prophecies. The throne would test them, scour their heart until nothing false remained. If their essence endured the fire, the throne itself would bow. But if they faltered, they would be reduced to ash, their names scattered into the winds of oblivion. The desert bore scars of those who tried. Blackened fields stretched for miles, remnants of flames that once reached into the sky. Bones buried in sand still glowed faintly, as though remembering the fire that had devoured them. Travelers who stumbled upon the place turned away in fear, for even the air smelled of charred eternity. And yet, across the endless dunes, the throne still called. Its whisper reached beyond kingdoms, beyond temples, beyond graves. It did not speak in words, but in hunger, summoning the one for whom it was created. The flames shifted, waiting. The dust stirred as though restless. The earth groaned as though weary of carrying its own weight. Mountains shivered. Rivers split their banks, and the stars themselves seemed to falter in their courses. In that trembling silence, all creation turned its gaze toward the horizon where a figure emerged, not from throne nor from temple, but from the very fabric of eternity itself. The foreseen one returned, not as myth, not as echo, but as presence, stepping into the age that had awaited them since the first whisper of prophecy. Their form was both familiar and unearthly, cloaked in the dust of the world, yet carrying the fire of heaven in their eyes. Every step bent the air, every breath stirred the unseen currents of the river of souls. Kings who had boasted of power felt their crowns grow heavy, their voices mute. Nations paused mid-battle, their swords trembling as though struck by an invisible hand. The serpent's shadow, vast and terrible, recoiled, hissing into the corners of the earth as if fleeing from a greater light. For in the presence of the foreseen one, the hidden scroll began to unseal. Its fire-etched words blazed in the air, proclaiming truths that could not be silenced. Among its lines, faint yet undeniable, echoed the memory of words once spoken by a carpenter long ago. Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. The whisper carried across the nations, mingling with the prophecy of Anubis, intertwining the ancient and the eternal. The desert wind howled, as if to announce what men could not. The tombs shook, the black pyramid crumbled further, and the scales of Anubis glowed with a light they had never known. The foreseen one did not raise a weapon, yet armies staggered. They did not lift their voice, yet nations heard. Their return was not merely arrival, but unveiling, revealing what had always been hidden beneath the dust of ages. Yet even in this return, the story was not complete. The serpent, though recoiling, had not vanished. The throne of dust and fire still burned, unclaimed, and the river of souls surged with unrest, as though testing whether the world was ready to bear what was now revealed.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.